Hi there, I'm Woolly Wormhead and welcome to my channel. Today's video was originally recorded 5 years ago in May 2020. It is a workshop come free pattern for designing and knitting your own beanie to fit you or for any size head in any weight yarn. It was originally recorded as a taster workshop for when I was launching my Hand Knit Hat Academy, which is my learning platform all about hat related things and knit related things. I am no longer on Teachable. Since I have the shiny new website, I have moved my learning platform, the Hand Knit Hat Academy, to my website. That means that everything is in one place. Your purchases, your patterns, your tutorials, everything's all there, all together, which makes it much, much easier for you. Now, the version on the website is broken down into bite-sized chunks. So if you prefer to work through in smaller sections, that might be where you want to go. You can go and sign up. It's free. It will always remain free. There are subtitles on the version on the website, transcripts, and there's a handout, a free handout that guides you through the maths and the techniques. That's all over there on the website, and I'll pop that link down below so you can go and check out where it is. If you prefer to stay here and watch the video, then that's all right too. Um, do enjoy it. I hope you have fun knitting hats to fit yourself or gifts that you might want to knit for other people, and I look forward to seeing what you make. Okay. In this workshop, we'll cover the following topics. Measuring for perfect fit, where we learn to measure our heads to ensure that we get a good size hat. Demystifying negative ease, where we understand how negative ease works in making sure our hat fits well. The all-important swatch, which will give us the numbers that we need based on our yarn and our needle size. We're then refining the numbers so that we can cast on and get the right size hat for us. We will look at the alternate cable cast on as a masterclass. And then we will look at getting started with a brim. We will cast on and work the first brim section. Then we will look at the hat body and consider proportion in the overall beanie. Then we will look at mastering the crown shaping, thinking about our decreasing formulas and how we can get a nice rounded shape to the top. And then you will finish your hat. And then there'll be a workshop roundup. In today's workshop, we are going to look at making a bottom-up beanie in any weight yarn for any head size. And this is the hat that we're going to be looking at. It's a simple beanie. It has some nice little techniques in it, which I'll show you. This one has a ribbed cast on, which is a method known as the alternate cable cast on, which I've been using in my patterns for well over a decade now, I think. And it's one of the common techniques that I teach in my workshops that everybody likes. It's got an interesting little bit of detail here to help kind of break up between the brim and the body. And then it's got a nice smooth crown we have here. Okay. Now, to get ourselves started, we're going to need a little bit of information to start with first. So what I'd like you to do now is to grab yourself a tape measure and be prepared to measure your head. To be able to make a well-fitting hat, you need to know the size of the head that who's going to be wearing the hat, whether it's for you or as a gift for a friend or a member of the family, or even going to charity. You need to have an idea of who's going to be wearing the hat so that you can make sure that you make the right size. To be sure, one size does not fit all. And if you've ever followed me on any platforms or when I've had a discussion about this, then you'll know that that's actually something that I feel quite strongly about. My patterns normally have a minimum of 3 sizes. Some of them go up to 6 or 7. Those that have less sizes always include notes on how to adjust them because we all have differences and variations in our head sizes. It's not true that adult women have a certain size or that children are a certain size or even the men are a certain size. The range of sizes varies greatly, and it's not just in circumference, that's also in depth. So I just want to talk about briefly about how you can measure your head and the things, two key things that you want to look out for. The first thing you need to know is your circumference, and you want to measure your head around the widest part. So that will be here across the forehead and right here across the back of our head. When we take a tape measure around, we want to make sure that it stays snug on our head and it isn't too tight. It doesn't matter which unit of measurement that you work in, as long as you stay consistent and keep working in that same measurement. So I kind of tend to refer to things in inches because I'm old, and even though I was born in the UK, I was actually born for decimalisation. So for some reason, inches are just embedded in my brain easier. So what we want to do is we want to take it here, right across, and we want to bring it round, and we want to make sure that it stays snug. If you have a lot of hair, make sure that it doesn't keep slipping up. Make sure that just hook it under ever so slightly. Here, you want to make sure that it's the widest part here, okay? And that it's snug at the front. I'm sure this looks lovely with a tape measure dangling in my face. But if you want to, you can actually get somebody else to help you with this, because sometimes it makes it easier to have another person to hold the tape measure around the back. We measure this part because that's traditionally how it's been done. And that measurement across here is actually virtually identical to the one across here, which is where hats fit. So you can measure across here if you want to, but the fact that we've got a wide part here makes it easier to find the right place to measure. So that's your circumference. As I say, whether you're working in inches or in metric, then stay within that 1 unit because it makes it much easier for your calculations. The next measurement you need is the depth, and we're going to measure from the crown to the base of our ear. So we're going to find this point here, okay, and we're going to measure down to here. And we want to make sure that it comes straight down, okay, or you might want to bring it around this way, down to the base of the ear here. And that's also going to be a variable length. Not everybody with the same circumference will have the same length, and that's really important to know. So that once we have those two measurements, make a note of them because they're important. The next factor we need to consider to make sure that our hat fits well is negative ease. Now, negative ease can be quite a personal thing. A lot of people like a lot of negative ease. Some people don't like so much, but the point is that you have to have some, otherwise your hat won't stay on. I normally recommend a minimum of 2 inches or 5 centimeters or 12%, around about. If it's a stitch pattern that's not particularly stretchy, like a nice tight cable pattern, then you probably want less negative ease because the fabric won't stretch as much to go on. It also means that it won't give as much, so it's not going to fall off as easily. Whereas when you're working something like rib or sideways garter stitch, then you need more negative ease. And in those situations, 4 inches or even 5 inches is not uncommon. So remember that you've taken a measurement that's going to be your to fit size, and then your finished size is going to be the to fit size less the negative ease. So for instance, the hat that I've got here is a sample today. This hat has a finished size of 18 inches, which is about 45 to 46 centimeters. At 18 inches, it will be ideally suited for somebody between 21 and 22 inch head size. Okay, that's 3 to 4 inches of negative ease. That won't stretch it out too much. If I was to put it on a bigger head, then it would stretch the fabric out quite a bit, especially because this is quite a chunky yarn, and the heavier gauge yarns don't have as much room or as much stretch before they distort. So also bear in mind when you're deciding how much negative ease you have is what your stitch patterns are going to be and how stretchy they are, but also the weight of your yarn. Finer yarns like a sock weight or fingering weight, you will be able to get away with a little bit more negative ease because you've got more stitches in there, so you've got more things to concertina. It's like a finer spring. Heavier gauge yarns, they don't take much before they distort. So make a note of this because you're going to now have the intended size or the to fit size. You're going to have the finished size, which is the the to fit size less the negative ease, and then you're going to have to factor in there your stitch patterns and your weight of yarn. Now today, for this pattern that we're doing, we're going to be looking at a 1x1 rib and stocking stitch. So an average amount of negative ease of between 3 and 4 inches is going to be fine. Okay, so make a note of those, and then we're going to talk about gauge. The one last thing that we need to consider to make sure that our hat fits, especially if you want to make it in any weight yarn, and always use this formula going forward for whatever yarns you may have in your stash, is gauge. Now, a lot of people don't like to swatch and check their gauge, but it's actually a really important thing to do, especially if you've not used the yarn or fibre before.
Gauge measurements aren't as critical for a hat as they are for a jumper, and there's always the kind of philosophy that if the hat doesn't fit you, it'll probably fit someone else, and that's probably true. It's also a much smaller garment, and if you do make a mistake in a gauge, it's not going to be quite as drastic or as disappointing as it is if you make a large garment. But still, swatching is going to be important because we're going to be able to use the numbers that we get from our gauge swatch to calculate how many stitches we need to cast on. Now I have a swatch here that's in exactly the same yarn as my hat is in. The swatch has been knitted and blocked, which means it's been treated in the same way that I would treat the hat. That's one thing that's really important to remember, and I'll talk about that more another time, is that when you are blocking your hats, you want to block them and treat them as the same way as you would do when you wash a hat. So lace shawls, you might stretch them out to open the pattern out, and garments you might stretch or block to fit a specific size. But hats don't need quite the same treatment. It really does depend on the hat and how you're going to treat it when it's worn. So let's have a look at our swatch and let's measure. So here we have our swatch. We have ourselves a tape measure here, and if you're like me, you have cat hair in absolutely everything. Don't worry about that, it's a special feature. So I'm working in inches, and what we do is we open out our tape measure and we lay it across the center of our swatch. Now this swatch here is just over 6 inches by 6 inches. As you can see, it's closer to 7 there. So the finished size in the middle is nearly 6 inches. I put a garter stitch border around my swatch to make sure that it wouldn't curl up and alter the measurements too much. We also, even though gauge is given across 4 inches or 10 centimeters in most patterns, we want to make sure that our swatch is bigger than that, because then the information in the center is more accurate and you don't have any distortion at the edges, because nearly all of us have some distortion in the selvages of our knitting, and we don't want that to get in the way of our calculations. Okay, so we're going to lay it across. Ideally, you want to measure across 4 inches or 10 centimeters. It gives a more accurate result. Measuring across 1 inch doesn't really help and doesn't really show any variations, especially with a yarn like this one. This is Manos Wool Classica, and I'll put all the information about the yarn in the notes at the end. But you can see it's thick and thin. If you're only measuring across 1 inch, you might just happen to get a bit that's thick or thin, but you're not going to get the full effect of the fabric. And by working across 4 inches or 10 centimeters, it gives you more numbers, more data to make an accurate calculation with. So what we want to do is I want to measure in the swatch. I'm going to concentrate on stitch gauge here at the moment, and we can see here that there are 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches to 1 inch in our gauge here, which is what I expected. I've used this yarn a lot over the years, and it always gives me on 5.5mm needles 16 stitches to 4 inches or 4 stitches to 1 inch. Always gives me the same, and it's nice and reliable like that. So this is one of the reasons why I chose this for a sample, because I knew that it wasn't going to do anything odd or strange in our workshop today. So we know here that we've got 4 stitches to 1 inch. We want to measure the row gauge. It's not as critical for today, but it's a good habit to get into. We have got here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows to 1 inch. And again, we're going to measure over. I've already done this, so I know actually where I want to be measuring on the swatch to give you the best results, because that then cuts a little bit of time out. But if you're not sure, measure your full 4 inches across. And it does come out at 6 rows to 1 inch, which is roughly looking at 16 stitches and 24 rows to a 4 inch square, which is a good ratio and a good average there for this yarn. So now that we have got our gauge measurement, we want to get down to how many stitches per unit of measurement. And this is one reason why I find it happy to work in inches, because you don't work in quite so many fractions in your brain as you do with metric. I tend to not use a calculator unless it gets quite complicated, because these are lots of numbers I've worked with before. However, you might want to have a calculator ready for this, especially if you prefer to work in metric, because you are going to have fractions of or decimal points of numbers, and they're going to be rounded up and recalculated at some point. So what we then want to do, we want to go back to the measurement that we know that we needed to make the finished size of our hat, which is our to fit size less the negative ease. And as I said in this one, the example is a finished size of 18 inches. Because we know that the gauge is 4 stitches to 1 inch, you then want to cast on 18 lots of 4. Okay, so you need to have a finish size of 18, and we know there's 4 stitches to an inch, so we need to multiply 18 by 4, which meant that for this hat, I had a cast on number of 72. 72 stitches is what I would expect for this. The numbers haven't done anything different at all. And 18 inches is a good size to aim for because there's a lot of adult heads that will fit this. Not everybody, but it's one of the more common sizes. If I wanted to make it to fit a child who, say, has got an 18 or 19 inch head, then I would probably make it a finished size of 16 or 17 inches. What I'll do is in the notes, I'll include a little table that gives you an idea of some of the measurements, some of the common measurements, and also some typical start on numbers or cast on numbers for you to start with. In case you don't know where your hat's going to end up, if it's going to charity or something, then you can use that as a kind of starting point if you don't want to do all of the maths. Okay, so then we now know we have calculated the finished size of our hat, we know our gauge, and we know how many stitches we want to cast on. Having done the calculations to decide how many stitches we cast on, it's not just a matter of that's the end and we cast on. Okay, we have to think about the crown shaping. Now, I remember once when Ravelry was a very, very new website, and I was on a forum somewhere, and somebody even made a comment about what's the point in doing something nice in the crown shaping because nobody ever sees the back of the hat. And I was just I was horrified because actually the crown shaping is it's one part of the hat where you get a lot of different chance to put patting in, because depending on the type of crown shaping you're making, it could be a circle and there's loads of room for decoration and pattern in there. Because we're making a beanie, what a beanie is when you actually kind of construct it is a cylinder with a flat top. It is a cylinder with a circle on top. And we want to make something that looks flat when it's spread out. Now, you'll often have heard that actually beanies of this kind of style want to be a multiple of 4. The problem I want to kind of point out that if we work on a multiple of 4, when you only have 4 decrease lines, it makes them quite harsh. If you want to soften it up, the patterning, or even make more of a pattern in it, then what you want to do is you want to increase the number of spokes that you have, or the radius or mitre lines that you have in your crown shaping. So this one has 8 because the hat, we calculated my sample that I cast on with 72 stitches, and so that's a multiple of 8. And so there's 8 lines of decrease going to be happening in the crown. So where with 4 stitches you might decrease 4 stitches every round, with 8 stitches you would decrease 8 every other round, and that plain round brings the average number of stitches down to the same point. If you wanted to soften that line further, you could cast on a multiple of 12, in which case then you would decrease 12 stitches every third round, because there'd be 2 plain rounds, and those lines would get softer and there'd be more of them, and that can look really lovely. But for this sample, we're working on a factor of 8. Okay, so when you are ready to cast on, you can practice your alternate cable cast on. Make sure that you have a multiple that is divisible by 8. Preferably 4 will be fine, but 8's better. Now, if you then get a multiple where you kind of look at your numbers and think, well, that one gives me 2.5 inches of negative E, but if I take it down, I'll get 3.5. I'm always going to say round down. Okay, because more negative E's is better than less. So if your numbers come out at something like 75, you could think to yourself, right, do I go to 80 or do I go to 72? And I'm going to say go to 72 because, as I say, more negative E's is better. And this now is at the point where you can do any rounding. Up until this point, I would try and keep your numbers as accurate as possible. When you get here, this is where you have to round them down because you have to make it fit the mathematical structure that happens in the hat. If you ever take any of my other classes about hat design, I talk about the structure of the hats a lot, and they're nearly always determined by the crown. That's why the crown is so important in a hat. It's not just a nice decorative feature, something that finishes it. It actually determines the mathematical structure that happens within your hat. Okay, but say, do your numbers, do a little bit of maths, and then get something to a multiple of 8, preferably, and then get casting on. What I want to show you now, which is a bit of a bonus, is one of my favourite cast-ons, the alternate cable cast-on. It's a very quick ribbed cast on. It's one I've been using for a long time, and it's one that when I've taught it to people, they've loved it. It's also very adaptable cast on because it's based on the cable cast on, which means it shares similar properties to the cable cast on. And I'm going to do a separate workshop about that because it's worthy of a whole workshop by itself. But today I just want to show it to you as a quick way of doing a ribbed cast on. It is slightly different in finish to a tubular cast on, and anybody that's used the tubular cast on a lot and then were to sit and compare this, you'd notice the differences. And that's okay. If you prefer the finish of a tubular cast on, then go for it. But this is much quicker, and it means you get going much more quickly. So here is how I start. I have got 5.5mm needles. I'll include the information about the needles in the notes. These ones are carbons. I'm working on the short tips with a short cable because I work on hats all the time, and this is my go-to. I'm also I hear from people that the short tips are much better for RSI in the shoulders and elbow as well. So that's helpful. And I just love short tips. I'm not a magic loop person as a rule. I just like to work on a nice small circumference. So rather than make a slip knot, what I do is I wrap the yarn around the needle. The reason being for this is that it's much easier to get a nice neat finish right at the end. So you can do a slip knot if you want to secure it, but however, this is what I do. So I wrap the yarn over, I leave the yarn towel to this side, I take it over, and then you work in yarn sides there. I bring the yarn towel underneath and wrap it over, and I just hold it there with my fingers. So it's just looped around, and it's going to be ideal for finishing later at the end. So that first wrap on our needle, we consider our first stitch. Now, when we're doing this cast on, we kind of cast it on in reverse. So we want to treat that as our first purl stitch. Okay, so that means that the next stitch that we're going to cast on is going to be a knit stitch, and we treat it in the same way that you do a cable cast on. With a cable cast on, you always go behind the stitch. You do not want to go into the loop, you want to go behind at all times. So go behind, bring the stitch up, put it onto the loop. Whether you twist them or not as you put them on is entirely up to you. There isn't a right or wrong way to do that. It really does depend on the finish that you're looking for and which one works best for you. What I will say is though is be consistent, okay? But there isn't a right or wrong way to do it, okay? So now that we've got a purl stitch and a knit stitch, we now want to cast on and create ourselves the next purl stitch. And that means, and this one's a little bit more awkward to start with, that we've got to go behind the last loop. We've got to bring it up from behind. And this is actually what constitutes a backwards purl cast on, okay? Which is basically a cable cast on in reverse. And that now goes back up on the needle. And as you can see, and you'll see it more when we get more stitches on the needle, how the stitches change. We know that we've just made a purl stitch because the yarn is in the position as if we had just purled, okay? And the stitch leans towards the back. When we make a knit stitch, which I'm going to do next, so it goes in behind, wrap it around to make a knit stitch, okay? The stitch anchor is at the front and the yarn is at the back. That's always the case after you've just worked a knit stitch. So we want to come back in here again. Okay, I had tightened it up a little bit much, so I'd loosen it up there. And we're going to create another purl stitch, and that then goes back onto there. And then go behind that, and we make another knit stitch. Okay, and then back and behind there, and we make another purl. And then we make another knit. Now, because of the type of hat we're making, we always want to cast on in a multiple of 8. Preferably 4 will work, but 8 is better. Okay, that's because of the crown shaping. Here we can see, even though this is a thick and thin yarn, we can still see the groups of stitches together. So we've got a purl and knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit, purl, knit. And you always want to end with a knit stitch, okay? Because generally when we're working a 1.1 rib, then it's always going to be at least a multiple of 2. And by ending in the knit stitch, and if you always kind of get into that rhythm of doing it, you know that even if you forget which one you just worked, you should be able to remember, well, I stopped there, so I worked a knit stitch, so I'm going to work a purl first. Now, it's actually not the knits and purls that give it the ribbed edge. This is something that comes up quite a lot in discussions in my workshops, is that people go, well, if I want to do a 2x2, then I just cast on 2 purls and cast on 2 knits. And the answer to that one is no, it doesn't work. But as I say, that's a topic for another day. It's actually the changing over of the yarn beneath the needles that actually gives it the ribbed effect. Okay, it's the swing between knit and purl and not the knit and purl itself. So I'm just going to cast on one more knit stitch, and I'm going to stop there because I want to show you what you would do when you work your first row. As I've said, this is like basically casting on in reverse. We start there and we go across this way. Most of us, when we work one by one rib, it's more logical and just more of a habit to start our one by one rib with a knit stitch. So this is why I do this one row flat before joining in the round. So what I would do here is I would knit this stitch, and then I would purl the next one, and you would then basically work one row flat before joining in the round. Okay, that's really important to do it that way. It gives you a row already, so you're less likely to twist your stitches, but also it puts your rib sequence in something that's more familiar. And then we do all that way. I mean, this is obviously just an imaginary cast on here. This is not going to be enough for a hat, but I'm doing it to demonstrate what you would do. And let me just knit these here or work these stitches, and I'll quickly show you what happens once you've joined in the round. Almost there. Okay, and then we get to the last one, and the last one, yes, is just an anchored stitch, but it's actually going to be okay just to purl it, and it's actually much softer because you can tighten out there. Now what this looks like when it's done, when you've done your ribbing, is this. Okay, there's not a knot there. It's actually then really easy to weave that in and sew it in and make it look like it doesn't exist. It's actually a much tidier way of finishing it there. So that there is the alternate cable cast on. That's it after one row worked, and this is it with a body of rib knitting on it. For the ribbed brim of our hat, I always recommend, especially on a beanie like this, a nice deep rib brim. This one is about 2 inches deep. I like a chunky rib brim. I like it to be a feature on a nice simple hat like this. Not just because it looks nice though, it's because it adds much more structure to the hat. That deep rib brim will have much more spring and it will stretch out of shape less easily. If you have a shorter, like say an inch brim, that will look okay, but it will also kind of stretch out really quickly because it will have less support at the base of your hat. So I recommend going for something that's nice and chunky like this. What I have here, this is something else that adds structure to the hat, is a twisted rib brim. Now, only the knit stitches are twisted, okay? Not the purl stitches. You can see on the back here that the purl stitches are not twisted. This means that you get the effect of the twisted rib brim and you still get some support in it, but it's not as fiddly to knit. All right, so that's just the knit stitches through the back of the loop and a regular purl. To kind of finish off the brim before we start into the body of the hat, we have a ridge of purl stitches. This is a nice decorative feature that I kind of use quite a lot. It denotes the end of the brim. It kind of gives it a finishing point and gives the body a starting point. When the rib just flows into a stocking stitch hat, it can look a little bit, I don't know, there's no beginning or end. It can merge a bit and it's not quite as nice, in my opinion. All right, so this is something that I recommend doing. Now, to do this, let me just grab this sample here. This is one that I made earlier. I'm just going to unpick a couple of stitches here so I can show you how to do the twisted rib. So let's take back 4 stitches because I'd finished my brim, but I want to show you how to do this. Okay, so this is the brim almost done, and I've gone for the same kind of depth as I have on the other sample. So what we do is we knit the knit stitch through the back of the loop, regular purl stitch. Okay, and then we go through the back of the loop again for the knit stitch and the regular purl stitch. And you can see that what that does there, it gives this really nice twist there to the knit stitches. To make the purl ridge, we've just got to the end of our round there, you literally just purl all of the stitches all the way around. So we just keep going like this. Do this for one whole round. And as you can see, after a couple of stitches, it's already creating that nice effect. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm now going to purl to the end of the round. When I've got to the end of the round, I'll come back and show you what we're going to do next. once we are ready to start working on the body, so if you've put the pearl ridge in, you'll do it now, or if you're not going to do the pearl ridge, you can go straight from the rib brim into the body. What you'll want to do is to now knit stocking stitch in the round, all right? And you would do that by knitting every stitch. And so I'm just going to start this off now. I'm just going to keep knitting around and around and around. And the great thing about when you're working in the round is that you're working a continuous spiral. So there's no end of row and beginning of row to start. You can just keep on knitting. All right. You can use a stitch marker to indicate the start of your round, or you can use the yarn tail, which is the way that I'll probably tell it here because I can see the start of the round here. And you will just keep on doing this until you are ready to start the crown shaping. Okay, so you just keep going around and around and around. And if this is great TV knitting, actually, something you can sit down and do without looking, so long as you can feel your way into the knit stitches, you'll be good to go. So I'm going to keep doing this and then I'll come back in a little while so we can have a look at the crown shaping. Okay, having knit our way through the body of our hat and ensuring that we knit every stitch to create stocking stitch in the round, we are going to be ready to start working on the crown shaping once we reach the desired length. Now, the length that your hat wants to be before you start shaping does depend on the overall length of your hat, of your head, which was one of the first measurements we took from the crown to the ear. Now, I will include notes, more specific notes, in the PDF handout that comes with this class, going through the maths of that much more, and it involves the row gauge, which is one of the other measurements we took quite early on. However, as a rule of thumb, and some of it does depend on that ratio between stitch and row gauge, because that's often 3 to 4 or 2 to 3. A general rule of thumb is that the length of the body and the brim before you start crown shaping is 2/3 of the overall length. Now, you know how I was saying before that a beanie is constructed as a cylinder with a flat circle, okay? That overall length from our crown to the ear has to be from the center of the circle to the bottom of the cylinder. It's not the length of the cylinder, then the circle. Okay, so the overall length of the hat has to be the height of the circle, which is the brim and the body, and the radius of the circle, okay, which is half the diameter across. And so from the center of the circle down is the overall length. That's quite important, and I'll make sure that that's in the notes for you, and there's a little schematic to help explain that. So what you are doing at this point, when you've worked the brim and the body, you're working the cylinder, okay? When we start crown shaping, we're going to start working on the circle. And as I say, that circle does contribute to the length. So what you want to do as a rough ballpoint is to make sure that your cylinder, the height of your brim, from the cast on edge of the brim to the last row of the body is roughly 2/3 to the overall length that you measured from the crown down to the ear, okay? Now, when you've reached that point, or if it's going to change, if you want something more specific, I mean, for instance, you can at this point add in some slouch, which means that you're adding in length to make it extra long so it hangs down. Or you can, if you're going to do your brim slightly differently, include a fold up brim and knit it for the next couple of inches. I mean, that's all options that you have at this point. But where we are now in this sample is that we are ready to start the crown shaping. Now, when I was saying about the multiple of numbers, the mathematical structure underneath our design wants to be a multiple of 8 where possible. Okay, so we decrease 8 stitches every other round. So there's a plain round in between, and that plain round softens the lines of the decreasing. Okay, you can see here it's much softer. It's a really nice radius. Nice and soft, not too sharp and hard. 4 can be a little bit too much, in my opinion. But it depends on what your gauge is and what your maths is and how your numbers work out. So what we've got here, we have 72 stitches, which means that there are going to be 9 stitches initially every 1/8 of the hat. Okay, so what we will want to do, because it's 8 by 9, basically, we want to do 8 decreases every round. So there's 9 stitches in the first segment. So we start off with our decrease formula as K7, K2 together. So because that then goes all the way around. So you would literally K7, whoops, goes into this These single ply yarns are lovely for working with, but they can be a little bit bitty. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Because when you calculate how many sections you're going to be, you've got to include all of the stitches, and remember that 2 of them are going to be used in the decrease. Okay, K7 and K2 together adds up to 9, because that's how many we've got all the way around. And we keep doing that all the way around. So the first round here is K7, K2 together. Repeat that from the beginning to the end of the round, and that will be 8 stitches decreased. The next round will be a plain round, so you just knit all of the stitches. And then the next round will be K6, K2 together, because you've lost 1 stitch in each section with the decrease in the last shaping round. And then you have a plain round, and then you will then be K5, K2 together, and you can keep on going like this. You don't have to do a K2 together. It can be an SSK. And for a nice cartwheel effect, you can put the SSK at the beginning of the repeat. So this one would be SSK, K7, repeat around. Okay, it will curve the opposite way, which can be really nice. I mean, which one you do is entirely up to you. I'll make sure there's options in the PDF notes for you so that you understand that that's another way you can do it. So I'm just going to do this around 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, together. I'm going to do 1 round and just show you what it looks like. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And already the stitches are getting a little bit small for the needle. 2, 3, 4. One thing that you're going to want to think about as you do this is think about what needles you want to use for your crown, because you're going to get less and less stitches, and you're going to want to make sure that you've got a method for working on small circumferences. Let me just check. So I'm talking to you. 2, 4, 6, 7. Now, I'm not much of a magic loop person, okay? I would normally take myself down to DPNs for this. Okay, almost there. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Together. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And that all went evenly into that round. There you go, there's my end of round marker, K2, because I'd already calculated how many 8s would be in the circumference, so that I knew exactly how many stitches to work on. Now you can see here that we've got the decreases are starting to show. If we look at this one here, you can see that it's a fairly soft line, and that's because of the plain lines in between. Okay, I'm going to keep emphasizing that because I think it does make a big difference. So the next round will be a plain round. I don't need to change my needles at this point because there's just enough there for me to work another round. Maybe another decrease round, but you can see there's not many stitches on this needle, and it's going to start to change. So what we need to do is to think about what needles we want to use next. So I would normally use DPNs. I used to use DPNs all the time for all of my hats until I discovered that they could actually make short tips on interchangeables, and that's what I use all the time. You can, if you prefer, use a magic loop method. So if you've got interchangeables, so you want to change your needles over, these were the ones that I used to demonstrate the cast on method. Now, ideally, you want a long cable for this. Now, this is one that I've just taken out of my needle case, and it's not one I use often. As I say, I don't do magic loop. And this is one of the reasons why I struggle with it, because the loops of the cables aren't always ready to be opened out, and they're quite springy, so they can catch the stitches quite a lot on them. Okay, this one is shorter. Now this one is not recommended length for magic loop. However, I think it works quite well for a traveling loop, or if you've got 2 sets, you can work on 2 circulars. I'm not covering all of these methods for short circumference in this workshop because that's quite a bit of information. It's probably a workshop in itself, but I just wanted to give you the options now and get you to think about it as you're going to start getting a smaller circumference on the top of your hat. But for this rest of this class, I'm going to show you is how I'm working with DPNs. So I'm going to now work through this section of the crown. I'm not going to do the whole crown on video for you because you'll be here a long time waiting, at least 20 minutes. What I want to do is to just work through. I'm going to do a plain round next, then I'll keep doing the decrease rounds, and then I'll bring this sample back when I'm right down to the end because I want to show you how I finish off the top of the hat. Okay? Okay, so this is now my the sample hat there. I've been decreasing every other round, 8 stitches every other round, and I've got down to the last round. Of course, I'm on a nice thick bit of the yarn, which I wasn't expecting, but that's okay. And the last round that I worked was K1, K2 together. Now, I've stopped at that point because I want to talk something, an important issue that comes up when you're working on the crown shaping, especially of a beanie. With this example, we are working a decrease round, plain round, decrease round, play round. So that way then you see you soften up the lines, you have more lines of decreasing and it looks much nicer. What we want to do as we get to the end, we want to remove the last plain decrease round. The reason for this is that it forces the hat to be flatter. Okay, it kind of stops that little point occurring at the crown that a lot of people don't like. So I did it here and we can see that it's got a much nicer, much flatter finish to the crown. Okay, so having just worked this last round, so we did K7, K2 together, plain round, K6, K2 together, plain round. We went on and on like this until I did a K1, K2 together. I haven't worked the plain round. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go straight into the last decrease round and show you how I finish off for the hats. So we are just going to work K2 together all the way around now. So it's going to take it down to 8 stitches when we've finished. And so this is a thick and thin yarn, and it's decided to throw up a really kind of thick part as I'm doing this, which is a little bit unfortunate because it makes it a little bit more fiddly, especially on these needles. But it's okay. It's okay. You can see what's happening. There's a really big bit there. Don't forget, when you're working with DPNs, especially as you're fighting the stitches at the end, do keep them nice and tight so you don't get any ladders forming in your crown shaping. All right. And then the last one here. Because I worked this across 3. So I put 3 lines of decrease on each of these 2 needles and 2 on this one. You can work them on a set of 4 and evenly spread them across all 4 needles, so have 2 decrease sections on each needle. In my patterns, I don't dictate the type of method you should use for working the round, and I don't dictate where you should place DPNs. I think that should be a personal choice and it should be how you feel comfortable. So here we are, we've got down to our last 8 stitches and we can see there that we are ready to close this off. So what we do is we want to leave a good length on this. Okay, I'm going to cut it at about 12 inches or 30 centimeters. And I'm going to cut it at one of the thinner points on the yarn. And then I'm going to take a large needle here. This one in particular has a large eye, which is very good for this yarn. Thread it through. And then what we're going to do is we're going to thread it through all of the stitches that are left. So through each one, do not take the DPN out until you've taken all of the stitches off. These DPNs are zings. I'll put you all the information in the notes that accompany this, but they're aluminium, so they're a little bit kind of like high-pitched sound as they're dropping on the table. I don't always work with aluminium often, but of the materials that I like, there are a few options of DPNs in this particular size. I don't normally work with such large needles. I normally work on a DK weight yarn, but this is a nice quick yarn to work through for this workshop. So there we see, okay, we have put all of the stitches, all of the live stitches are on our needle, and now all on a on the thread, on the yarn that we were working on. And what we do is we literally just put it through and make it nice and tight, and that looks really nice and lovely. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take our yarn through to the wrong side, turn our hat inside out. I generally kind of to make sure that this stays shut, because sometimes this can come undone if you don't do it securely enough, I will then run through every other stitch of the same crown stitches on the underside, because that then tightens it up. Okay, it ensures it kind of catches before you weave in the ends. It's like an extra kind of tug on there. And then to weave in the ends, I generally do them on the underside. You can see these little lines here. That's the underside of the decrease. So I tend to do them there, and I will weave through every other, catch them up. This is a single ply wool yarn. So as soon as this is blocked, it's going to felt itself in anyway. So we don't have to worry too much about trying to weave it into the stitches any more than that. And that generally for this is going to be okay. So I'm going to cut that there. Oop. And what I want to do quickly is I just want to show you, I'm going to take my stitch marker out because I don't want to leave that in there when I go to put it in to block it. I just want to show you how I would deal with this end here. You know where we talked about the alternate cable cast on? I did a wrap around the needle and I showed you how to do it without putting a knot in. I said it's really great for weaving in at the ends afterwards, and it is. It is really easy. So what we'll do is we work here, and then you're going to go underneath this first stitch, okay? Put that in, okay? Then go through the bottom half of that part of the stitch there. Okay, and then come back in over this side. All right, actually let's take that bit out there to down underneath here. Just do that again for you because I caught the wrong loop. Okay, so we want to make sure, whoop, bulky yarn isn't helping on this particular instance. Okay, so basically what you're doing is you're closing up and it looks like it's well and truly hidden, and it just looks like the rest of the stitch. Okay, so you go through underneath this one here, and then take it behind the stitch that's worked there, and then you'll just weave in your ends as you go up there. I tend to do it for the length of the brim, like that. Okay, it does like to pop out this thick and thin yarn. And if I've got a little bit of yarn left over, I might do horizontally just to make sure that I've got a good few inches of yarn woven in. So I might just kind of pop a couple of, pick up a couple of stitches here. As I say, it's going to felt itself in, so it's going to look nice and neat. Cut that. And there we go. So that's the end there finished. Okay, once that's blocked, that'll even out nicely. There's the crown all nicely looking in. I say this really does need blocking because the thick and thin nature of this yarn does look a little bit rippled on fabric. But there we are, and there we have made our beanie in custom yarn to fit you. Thank you for following along with this workshop, and I hope that it's been helpful and that you're going to be keen to go away and make your own beanies in a size to fit you in the yarn that you have in your stash. If you need any help with this, then please do pop to my Ravelry forum. All of pattern support for any of my patterns is available on the Ravelry forum. I'm not able to help with private email for these. But that's a good thing because it means that there's going to be loads of people on the forum that are going to be able to help you out. And if there's something that I've explained that you're not fully understanding, they'll be able to explain it in a different way for you. I think forums are fantastic for helping people out. And if your question hasn't been asked, then please do post there. Also, I want to say that if you want to follow me on anywhere, then please look up Woolly Wormhead. Woolly spelled OOLL. I am Woolly Wormhead on Instagram. I have a Woolly Wormhead page on Facebook, on Ravelry, and I also have my website, woollywormhead.com. Ravelry and Instagram are my two primary forums, as well as, of course, I'm expanding my classes and the video platforms. This free workshop has been supported by my patrons. Designing hats, publishing patterns, writing books about them, teaching the workshops is my full-time job. I love providing free content to help as many people learn about this, but I wouldn't be able to do it with the support of my patrons. So again, I'm Woolly Wormhead there. If you want to pop over and have a look, and if you are in a position to support us or like the work that I do and want to encourage more, then would absolutely love to see you over there. That's one of my favourite places at the moment on the internet, is like going in and sitting talking to my patrons and telling them what's happening in my studio. So do come and say hi, and maybe we'll see you there. But I would love to see your finished patterns, your finished hats from this pattern. It's going to be listed on Ravelry, so you can go and add your projects there, and that way then I can have a look through and see what you've made. But also on Instagram, if you use the hashtags of Woolly Wormhead or Woolly Wormhead hats, then I'll also see your hats there as well. That's a lot for today. And thank you for joining me, and thank you for listening and giving me your time, and happy hatting. Finished. I think I'm finished.